This might come as a bit of a shock to some of you, but things in the world of fiction, whether they be movies, TV, or books, didn't actually happen. And in a lot of cases, couldn't ever happen.
Yeah, when you saw Daenerys Targaryen riding that dragon, that wasn't a real dragon. When you saw Arnie getting blown up at the end of the Terminator and then come out of the flames as a robot, that wasn't really him. And when you read about Harry Potter riding a broomstick and catching the snitch, you were reading about a sport that doesn't actually exist. In fact, broomsticks don't really fly and there's no such thing as a snitch. So yeah, clearly the world of fiction isn't supposed to be 100% realistic. Genres like fantasy and sci-fi are defined by the fact they involve things that couldn't really happen. Moreover, I feel like all forms of fiction need to have some element of fantasy to them. Otherwise, what's the point of it even being a work of fiction? You may as well tell a true story. The major appeal of rom-coms such as Love Actually or When Harry Met Sally comes from the fact that the stories in them probably couldn't ever happen, and it's just nice to imagine or pretend that they could. Stories often need characters to do or say things that don't make complete logical sense, because otherwise the viewer or reader won't understand things, or worse, you wouldn't even have a story.
So, this got me thinking. At what point do you draw the line?
Where exactly do leaps in logic and nonsensical character behaviour become too much? Well, clearly this depends on the individual watching or reading the work of fiction. My experience on the internet and watching the news over the years is that a large percentage of the general public don't even seem to care if what they are saying in the real world makes any kind of sense. So why would they care if certain things in the world of fiction make sense? Others, on the other hand, might be more distracted by things they don't understand and become less immersed in the story if they are constantly thinking about things they didn't get. In Harry Potter, I never understood how the Ministry of Magic could tell where a spell was being performed, but not who was performing it, especially since each witch and wizard have their own wand. It's something that distracted me while I was reading certain parts of the later books, and I kept hoping they would explain it. Others, however, said they never even thought about it, and didn't even feel it mattered even when I pointed it out. It might also have a lot to do with how long you would need to think about something before realizing that it doesn't make sense, coupled with how quickly the story moves on from the thing in question. With the story constantly progressing and things happening all the time, the viewer or reader might just simply forget about the thing that didn't make sense. In Game of Thrones, the character of Littlefinger performs a murder at the end of an episode, and it isn't until a few scenes into the next episode that we see the fallout of this act, and it becomes apparent that he didn't have any kind of plan to get away with what he'd done. However, because this happens a while after we've seen the murder, it becomes easier to forget this kind of thing.
There is also this argument, which personally I find a bit dismissive, that if the work of fiction in question has a heavy basis in fantasy, then it's okay for things to be unrealistic.
The cartoon logic in Independence Day of putting an object close to alien ships when they fire is okay because that's a movie with aliens invading Earth. Characters apparently moving at supersonic speed across Westeros is okay because that's a show that has fire-breathing dragons. Scar not just killing Simba after the stampede is okay because that's a movie that involves talking lions. This sounds a bit too much like a get-out-of-jail-free card. You are basically saying no fantasy or sci-fi story can ever have any kind of plot hole. Real-world logic can apply to stories with fantasy elements. You just need to understand the rules that have been put in place.
Which brings me to another important point. Do things make sense based on the rules that the work of fiction in question have set down?
Or does it actually break its own rules? In Daredevil, Matt Murdock's ability to tell what someone is doing when he can't see makes sense based on the rules of his enhanced senses. In The Day After Tomorrow, however, we are told that during an ice storm, the air will be so cold people will freeze in seconds. But then later on, we see people outside during the storm. The movie contradicts itself, and that to me makes it a far bigger problem.
But after thinking about this problem a bit more, I realised that the question of where you draw the line probably isn't the right question to ask.
It's a bit too much of a black and white way of looking at things. You can't define things as just a problem or not a problem. You have to think a bit more about how big or small a problem they are. Rather than asking if something makes sense, we should be asking how much it really matters when you are judging the work of fiction in question. How the Ministry trace spells in Harry Potter still bothers me.
But does that mean I hate Harry Potter now? And think this small oversight makes it the worst book series ever? Of course not.
I still love the series with a passion, In fact, I'm not sure any plot hole or lack of information would ever make me dislike a work of fiction. Every movie, TV show, and book has plot holes. In fact, a lot of them are the whole reason the story even happens. But they are rarely the actual reason why a piece of fiction either is or isn't good. They are more like minor faults on a driving test. None of them individually are anywhere near enough to derail the story overall. But collectively, depending on how large, frequent, and distracting they can ruin a story a lot of the time.
Ironically, the presence of plot holes in a story is often the go-to argument when people want to talk about bad writing, when in fact it's not normally an indication of it.
Most of the time, plot holes are just something that either bother you or they don't. But even if they do, they shouldn't be a game breaker for you.